Welcome to the Stories in EDU podcast, the show where we talk with real educators and hear their powerful impact. Their stories will grab you, inspire you, and show you the reach of the work we do. And now, the Bretzman Group presents your hosts, Josh Gauthier and Mandy Taylor.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Stories in EDU podcast. I'm Jason Bretzman. I am a teacher of, 20-some years in Wisconsin. I teach AP Government in high school and a civics course called American Issues. I am here tonight with Kenny Bosch and Aubrey Jones, and we're going to tell some stories in EDU. Thanks a lot to Josh Gauthier and Mandy Taylor for letting us guest host again and take away their microphones for at least one night. Kenny, how are you?
I'm doing great, Jason. Thanks for having me on. Josh and Mandy, again, we're thankful that we get an opportunity to be here on the Stories in EDU podcast. I'm Kenny Bosch. I teach children, according to what I read on Twitter, and I also teach U.S. history, American issues, and world history to freshmen. What I'm really excited about tonight is that we have our guest with us, and that is Aubrey Jones. Aubrey is a special education teacher in Deer Valley High School in California. She has been teaching for 5 years and is joining us today as a contributing author to the book Stories in EDU. Welcome to the Stories in EDU podcast, Aubrey. Happy to have you with us.
Thank you so much. I'm excited to be here.
Very good.
And so Kenny mentioned that that you are a contributing author in Stories in EDU, Sail with a Fleet. And your story is, it's actually the last one in the book. I think we saved the best for last, right?
Thank you.
Yeah, so here we are, Kenny and I, all full of sarcasm and all kinds of stuff like that tonight. And here you are, the nicest person in the world. And
I don't think my students would totally agree with you there, but
we did a survey, and it turns out that the majority agree with that.
So they must be wanting the A's as report cards are coming out, right?
Right.
It could be it. So tell the listeners a little bit about who we call Sidney in the book. Sidney and his phone.
Sidney was a very interesting student, I would have to say. I did come into the community of Deer Valley High School, I would say probably around November that year. And I inherited, a lovely English class of seniors who are your typical seniors, not wanting to disengage, not wanting to interact with the curriculum, not wanting to really do much of anything that's not on your phone. And Sidney was one that was particularly withdrawn. We went through a couple months, I would say, of me asking him if he wanted to be a part of the class, me trying to work with him one-on-one, and he just did not want to be a part of it. And I think for that semester, I assigned a senior footprint project. And I was really excited to see their personalities come out. But unfortunately, despite it being on his phone, Sidney didn't want to participate. So I was kind of, pulling out all my tricks. And then Sidney kind of started coming around a little bit and ended up being a really cool guy. And unfortunately, the class didn't embrace him as much as I did, but I really enjoyed the relationship that came out of him putting down his phone for 30 seconds.
So how did that come about? I mean, so you went almost full circle with him. How did it come about where can you tell us about the process that you went through?
So the process, it was a frustrating process. I mean, I think I was more excited about the curriculum than they were at first. We were doing some cover letter resume writing and wasn't into it. And then I decided to pull out a nutrition unit, which is I don't know if you guys are familiar with the ERWC curriculum that we're using now. It's this lovely fancy book of stories that aren't that engaging.
Oh.
But Sidney had some personal experience with nutrition, and that just really sparked his interest. And he started to really come alive, and he was giving me tips for the curriculum. There was a movie that he wanted to watch, so I said, okay, you got to police everybody. As soon as they bring out their phones, I'm turning it off. And he would look around about every 5 minutes and be like, get off your phone, I want to watch this, I'm learning something right now. So I think it was just like that little switch in what we were doing.
Oh, that's excellent. So it becomes the idea of voice and choice, and he got to contribute, and he got to help you make decisions about what to do, and yet you win because everybody's still getting the curriculum, and even more than probably they were supposed to get. Yeah,
it was I think it was a lesson. I mean, most importantly, it was a lesson for me in being able to let go of control a little bit and allowing them to have more of a voice in what we did. And I think that was the most powerful moment of this whole interaction, was realizing that allowing them to have voice and choice was okay.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it sounds interesting that you were describing how Sidney himself was pretty engaged in his own phone, but once you allowed him to take control of something that he was passionate about, then he actually became the one patrolling and looking out for everyone else's phone usage. Can you talk about that maybe even a little bit more? Like, how did you see that transformation for him take place? And in the classroom?
It was more like one of those days. I had started the movie that he had requested, and I can't really remember the name of it right now. It was on Netflix. But I do remember the content. It was something about like kind of diet and making better choices and being able to budget, like do it budget friendly. And he was really, really engaged in it, more so than I'd seen him in anything. But the rest of the class wasn't really paying great attention to the movie. And I said, okay, today we're going to do something else. And he said, no, I want to finish the movie. And so then I flipped it back on him saying, okay, well then you need to make sure all of your classmates are paying attention.
How did they respond to him? Try to look out and give them those reminders to put their phone away. Sometimes whether it's in school or in sports, when the teacher or the coach doesn't have to actually, look after and control the players, but the players and the students are controlling themselves or monitoring or policing themselves, you oftentimes get better results. What did you see that day, and how did you think that played out?
That day, at first I saw that they weren't taking him too seriously. They were like, oh yeah, you're just doing this because the teacher said so. And then he would come down and kind of slam their desk a little bit and say, no, I'm serious. Oh. And then I saw them respond to him and put away their phones and kind of keep it away, because he's like, she's going to turn it off. I know her. So it was kind of cool to see that come out.
Yeah, I bet.
That's interesting. Yeah, I had this experience rings true for me just today, for example. It's still a little bit raw. I had created this game. So we studied ideology in my civics class, and we were starting to study the legislative branch. And so I created this game where students had to go and find how our congressional delegation comes down on the issues. And so there were cards involved, and there was movement, and you had to go find out what you were supposed to do and find the issue, and then you had to write it down around the room, and then you could challenge other people, and then the winner was the congressional representative with the most people, most things written about them. And so it's just a different way for them to get connect the ideology to the member with movement and competition and that kind of thing. In 2 hours, it was like, hey, this is cool, and we get to move around, and we get to kind of do what we want to do and go where we want and write on what we, that kind of stuff. And then after lunch, I explained it, and somebody yelled out, well, what if I don't want to do this? I'm like, well,
that's not one of the choices in voice and choice.
Right. I will tell you what to choose when you choose stuff.
Right.
But yeah, that's hard because, instead of hanging out with my kids, I was, this weekend creating this new game. And, during my prep, I was setting things up and taping things to, and making the copies that they needed and trying to figure out how I get the different congressional districts printed out because that was the other card that they had to get. So I'm doing all this stuff and like, I got blood, sweat, and tears in this, man.
Yeah.
And then you go, well, what if I don't want to do it? I'm like, I don't know. We'll give you the packet, you could
Right.
do the worksheet. And
Sometimes we have to throw that parental logic of food at them. How do you know unless you tried it? And make them give it a try at least first. I think the thing that I really liked in your story again was like, and Jason was connecting to there, was the idea of voice and choice, and sometimes they might not know that they actually want to be a part of something, and you have to push them forward. And if you can find that one thing that they're really passionate about, and you open the door for them, they can make the connections that maybe you didn't even think to connect. I can think of a student I had 2 years ago. She's very much into art, and that was something I picked up pretty quick. It wasn't that clever or observant of me, but in class she'd have out a sketchbook and she was always drawing. And then I talked to her about a few things like sketch notes as a way to take notes as opposed to Cornell or bullet point or something else. But then in every single topic that we covered in world history, she connected it to art. And it depended on the time period, but we covered World War I, and we talked about post-traumatic stress disorder. And I asked her if she would be interested in finding how people were able to use art to kind of get off their chest, the issues and thoughts and, emotions they had with the war. She did. And then she would go and she'd make her own work. And that's just it. If we can find those ways to empower kids and find their passions, they'll produce some great work. So.
Wow.
And did you say that Sidney was an artist as well?
I did. Sidney was graduating in June, and he did give me a very nice cartoon version of me. For all you watching, you can see it. Otherwise, I'll describe it. My husband describes it as me cartoon formed, but mostly looking like an Apple teacher. But he did come back the last day of finals to give it to me, and it was kind of a big deal, I think, for him. And he did tell me that I was a fair teacher, but I was strict. So I think that was the best compliment I could get. So
I think that's great. Cool.
Yeah.
And looking at that picture, it almost makes me think of the Magic School Bus. It looks like you're drawn as the teacher in the Magic School Bus.
Well, thank you.
It's those things too, that when you think about a kid who is, has some talent in art, that they went home and took the time and they thought about the impact that you had on their lives, and they sat down and maybe spent a half hour, an hour. I don't know how long it takes because I can only draw squares and rectangles, but that this person was able to sit there and produce something like that and cared enough to come back and give it to you. It just says a strong message about the time that you took to invest in a relationship, and that person wanted to pay it back. I remember I had this former student who, I didn't know if I really made much of a connection with him at the time, but it was maybe 5 years later during the day, he just randomly shows up in my classroom, and it was very, to be honest, it was very bizarre. And he walks up, he's like, "Hey, Mr. Rosh," and I was like, "Hey, I don't even remember your name right now, and why are you here in this moment?" Didn't say those things. But as he walks in, he hands me this Bruce Lee hand-drawn, artwork that he made that was very, very well done, and it was framed, and he signed it. And I was just like, wow. And I do know his name right now. I'm just not saying it, but I was just like, wow, this kid thought about this many years later and decided to stop by and say something to me. And I think that's sometimes the difference when we are teaching older kids in the high school level. They might not tell you right away. They might come back later and let you know. And, they're not younger children who might say things a little quicker. And I think that's, again, another artistic form of our job. We work hard at it. We put in all this effort, and sometimes we don't see the fruits of our labor, and later on, sometimes it comes back in unique ways like that.
I think definitely teaching the special ed population, it creates another layer where we don't necessarily know the impact that we've made or if we've made an impact. So I think that's what made this so special. It was kind of twofold for me. I learned a huge lesson from Sidney, and then I got a piece of art too, which was kind of cool in the memory. So
Yeah, definitely. Now, and you talk about that at the end of your story that you were supposed to be teaching him, and he ended up teaching you so much.
He did.
Can you tell a little bit more about what do you think you learned? Is it about patience or perseverance or never giving up on a kid, or
I think it's a little bit of all three of those things. It was a really hard year. Like I said, I came into the community in November, and just it was kind of a mess, I felt like, at the beginning. And
you were like reassigned there at some?
I was reassigned. Yeah, I was at the middle school level and then came to the high school level.
In November.
In November, yeah.
That's a tough transition at any point, but even in the early parts of a school year. So go ahead,
Right.
continue.
So I think just kind of that standoffness in the beginning, and then just that patience. But then also, I don't know if it was so much his disability or what it was, but he would ask me to repeat things a lot. And he would say, okay, I'm through the first sentence, like start at the second sentence and go real slow now, just so I can get all the directions. And I think it was more him teaching me how to teach him that made me realize, okay, yeah, all that stuff we learned in school, like it applies here too. Yeah. And I need to have the patience with myself to slow down and to be there and to be present.
That's excellent. Have you had any contact with him, or have you heard about anything that he's doing since he graduated?
I actually ran into his best friend's sister on campus just the other day, and he is at the local community college taking 12 units and doing well-ish, is what she said. So.
But he's there, right? So
right.
He's there, yes.
That's wonderful. Before we head to our game of stories and change directions a little bit, you mentioned something about a senior footprint. Could you describe that a little bit so that we make sure that we, don't let that one go by without an explanation?
Senior footprint was designed to kind of have my seniors reflect on their legacy at the school and kind of what impact they were leaving behind. So the idea was that they look at each of their high school years and pull something that either they gained or they gave and share it with me just coming into the school. So I had some students create PowerPoints on friendship and the power of their friends and how that got them through what they perceive as traumatic times. I had some students kind of walking up and down the hall saying, like, this is where I did this, and go to class, all you freshmen. But just it was more for me to kind of see their footprint or see their personality come out, but then also for them to recognize like what they've gained or given.
That's a great idea. And it just sounds like a way for them on the way out, like you said, to kind of look back, be nostalgic when sometimes kids don't maybe see that they have had an impact either on their school or that others have had an impact on them. We all get so caught up in the exactness of the moment, but when you have some time to actually do that, and sometimes I say we need teachers to blame so that they can do that stuff, whereas they would maybe think about it on their own, but they don't want to do it. But if they have a teacher like my teacher's making me do this,
right,
then it has that kind of freedom that it grants them. So that's a really cool idea. It's a unique idea.
Yeah, I want to definitely continue that, I think, if I get seniors again.
I think that's
and just learning about them was so valuable too.
Yeah, so it has those extra things going on there. Mm-hmm. I'm sitting here trying to think how I can incorporate that into my classes because I think that's a wonderful thing. Even to think about it in terms of a digital footprint or a digital tattoo, as I call it, because it's more permanent than a footprint. Right. The idea of what is my impact and what will other people be experiencing, after I'm done with it. Okay, now you get the wheels turning. I like this. This is good. This is why we tell stories. And let me just remind everybody that Aubrey's story is in the new book, Stories in EDU, Sail with a Fleet. It's the 29th out of 29 chapters, and it is an excellent story. She even gives more detail than she's given here, and it's a great read. You can get that book at bit.ly. That's bit.ly t.ly/stories in edu1. It's available on Amazon. If you've heard of Amazon, you might want to head over there and get a copy of that book. And another thing that's available on Amazon are these fantastic cards called the Game of Stories. You can get those at tinyurl.com/go stories, G-O stories, Game of Stories. And we're going to play one of those cards right now. We've got these 52 prompts about different topics in education that get us talking and telling more stories. So we want to change direction a little bit. I'm going to shuffle these cards up, and this is not an app. This is real and live, and we are living and random and living on the edge without a net.
Yep.
That's like a mixed metaphor, I think. But there it goes. We're going to pick one of these cards. We're going to pick it right from the middle this time. Too easy. So it says here, use a Google tool. Tell a story about how you used Google Docs, Google Forms, or some other Google Suite tool to enhance or create a lesson. Was this the right tool? What are your next steps to go even further? And by the way, did you know the name Google is derived from the mathematical term that is 1 with 100 zeros after it, or also called a Google? The Game of Stories, not only asking us to tell stories, but teaching us along the way. Kenny, what do you got? Do you use anything by this Google company?
I've heard of them.
If you don't know who they are, you could just Google.
You stumped me on that whole Amazon reference, though. I haven't heard of that.
I told you about the sarcasm.
The sarcasm's pretty thick tonight, folks. As far as a Google tool goes, I think that Jason knows from my own style that I like to stack my tech, and I just try to layer a lot of what we do. So I can't say I have any particular Google tool that's my favorite, but for example, today we had our American Issues class that Jason and I both teach, and Jason's done a phenomenal job in laying an amazing foundation for that class, and he lets me work with him a lot. Yep. And so he has a Google Doc, and inside the Google Doc, there's a Google Doc, and inside that, there's a Vimeo linked and another Vimeo linked.
That's called a hyperdoc now.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah,
and
term for that.
It's on the World Wide Web. And then the other thing that I thought was pretty cool today is students were just saying that they had a difficulty with question 20, which asked them to make a kind of visual. And the vast majority of my students, which I think I have 25 students in that hour, I think 24 of them did not attempt that question, but one student did. And he used Google Draw. And he just put his visual right into it. And that was my example that I gave in class. Like, you could have used Google Draw. I said, or you could have, I give them all these other options that they could have used. And I think that is the beauty of Google and Google Suite, is that you just have to be a little more creative in how you add things to it. It doesn't always have to be a Google Doc inside a Google Doc. We can layer and have videos and visuals that kind of add on to the experience. So that's my answer to that question.
I'll throw this out there, sort of two different directions. One is that I like to tell my students about being efficient using Google tools. And so one of the things that I like to tell them about is Google Docs Quick Create. It's an extension that sits up there all the time, and instead of going into your Google Suite and clicking things and clicking new and then starting up a whole new thing, it just sits there, and it's a drop-down menu of what you want to create in the Google Suite that's new. Click it, and now you've got your new thing up there. So I like to tell my students about being efficient in that way. But most recently, I guess, I'm working with a group of teachers that also teach juniors, but in different content areas. And so we're collaborating on some ACT skills, like summarizing things. And so we're doing a lot of summarizing and practicing, and then we're having students assess each other. Hey, do you think this is good as a summary, or what could it, you add stuff like that. And so in their scoring, we're using a Google form. And I didn't want to type all that stuff, and I didn't want to do math. So I took a screenshot of the actual descriptions of each of the levels that you could score somebody on, and I dropped that picture into the Google form, and then I just put numbers on it. So when the information comes to my spreadsheet, it's not a bunch of words, it's a bunch of numbers, and then I can easily give it a formula and average everything.
Right.
And then I don't have to do math again, which is really one of my goals in life, is
right.
to do no math.
Great way to
Sorry,
be efficient.
math teachers. I love you. You're great. I just don't want to do it. Okay. And then can I just tell one more part of that? I like changing the view of the forms. So we have the the data that we have to collect for other people who want to know our data. And so the first one the form has, because it was like an early September thing, it has grilled meat, like Labor Day. And then the October form, I have some kind of Halloween scene. And then it gets a little bit more snowy. And I think there's some trees, evergreen trees in December and icicles in January. But those are all in the pictures, right? And you could even add your own. You can add your own picture. I like to do that sometimes too. There's a template out there. Chad Kafka from Wisconsin has a template that you can go and customize on your own. Google it, Chad Kafka, Google Forms template.
Okay. So it's Google Forms. Gotcha.
Yeah. All right. Well, that's the longest Google story ever. Sorry about that.
I'm thinking you have way too much time on your hands to put all that much detail into things.
Busted.
It's just a couple clicks.
Right.
I don't know. I feel the least tech savvy here, even though I'm probably the youngest. I'm just using Google Docs right now, and my study skills is a way to kind of keep their transition portfolio. My students on IEPs have transition goals and are working towards a transition plan. And so it's a way for me to keep all their journal entries and work towards that together in one location, one folder, and then I can provide the feedback instantaneously for them, and they like that. So keeps them busy and productive.
That is cool. Do you write comments then, or?
I do, yeah. Okay. So I'll tell them, go search this college. It has a really good program for that, and tell me about what you find or whatever it happens to be. And then they'll write back. So they like it because it's interactive, but they don't have to embarrass themselves by being uncool and talking to the teacher. So
that is so not cool. All right. Hey, that's a good way to do it. And your students are getting what they need and you're getting done what you need. That's real good. All right then. So one thing we forgot to ask about is how do we get in contact with Aubrey Jones? On Twitter or?
I'm on Twitter. I am actually under a different name. I am at just Megan87 right now, hopefully changing soon, but I am there on Twitter. I'm very active and love to provide support and exchange ideas and stories with anyone out there. So definitely get in touch with me.
That is great. Just Megan87?
Yes.
Wonderful. Well, thank you again for being here and sharing your story here and sharing your story in the book. Ladies and gentlemen, great educators, and Aubrey Jones is one of them, and great stories are out there all around us in the world of education. Some of them are shared in Stories in EDU, and we've all got a story to share. Maybe it's time for you to share your story. And by doing so, we connect with the other people that are out there. We might feel alone in our classroom, but we are definitely part of the fleet. And I'm so glad, Aubrey and Kenny, that you're part of my fleet, and I'm glad to be there with you and going out there and doing the things that we do every day. Thank you again, Aubrey, for being here.
Thank you, Aubrey.
Thank you for having me.
Kenny, it's good to see you. Keep doing the great work that you do around the country and the world, everybody. You're doing good work. You're changing lives. Keep it up.
Thank you for tuning in to the Stories in EDU podcast. Please be sure to subscribe and leave us a review. Until next time, thanks again.